When deputies forced open the corroded barn door on the outskirts of Oak Ridge, Oregon, the first assault on their senses was not sight but smell, a thick, poisonous stench that rolled outward like a physical wave. It was not simply the odor of human waste, but something much darker, the heavy reminder of years of secrecy festering behind wood and rust. As flashlights cut through the shadows, the officers froze. Before them stood 7 frail women with sunken cheeks and hollow stares. Their bodies were thin, their hair matted, their clothes torn, and their faces carried the unmistakable stamp of one bloodline. They did not move with fear. They did not cry for help. They did not even speak. Every set of eyes mirrored the same empty gaze, each one echoing the face of Jeremiah Blackwood, their father, their grandfather, and their jailer. For more than 5 generations, the Blackwood family had cut itself off from the world in the name of purity, creating life from daughters and sisters, weaving a chain so twisted that even hardened doctors would struggle to comprehend the damage. The barn was no farm structure, but a fortress built for confinement, a cage raised with intention. What had begun decades earlier, as rural privacy had decayed into a laboratory of cruelty, hidden in plain sight. The questions that haunted the officers were simple yet staggering. How had such horror remained invisible for nearly a century, and why had no one opened this door until now? If stories like this make your heart pound and remind you how reality can be far more chilling than any invention, then press the like button and subscribe so you never miss another hidden tale that demands to be told. And tell us in the comments below where you are listening from, so that together we can shine light on the shadows of history. The morning of October 17, 1997, began without warning in the quiet town of Oak Ridge. Fog clung to the mountainsides. Autumn leaves drifted across silent streets, and Sheriff Thomas Wilkins sat in his office sipping lukewarm coffee. The call that shattered the silence arrived just after 9. The voice was low, distorted by static, refusing to give a name. "There is something wrong in that barn," the caller whispered. "I hear screams. Not animal, human." The address he described belonged to the Blackwood family, a clan so private that many locals wondered if they were even still alive. Their land was a ghost on the county map, and no one had dared to ask why. By midday, a line of patrol cars crept along narrow forest roads guided by nothing more than a hand-drawn map and growing dread. The property lay almost 40 kilometers from town, cloaked in dense trees and thorny undergrowth, as though nature itself wanted to bury it. When they reached the clearing, the deputies saw a large red barn leaning at the tree line. It was not abandoned, but chained and sealed. Barbed wire wrapped the perimeter. Heavy locks secured the door. The stench seeped through before the cutters even touched steel. A blend of decay, waste, and something indescribably wrong. One deputy muttered it smelled like humanity itself had spoiled. Another said whatever hid behind that door would reveal the darkest secret Oregon had ever kept. When the chains fell and the hinges screamed open, silence fell heavier than the smell. Inside, the gloom shifted. At first, the officers thought they saw shadows, until those shadows moved. 7 women emerged barefoot and thin. Their ages seemed to stretch from early teens to middle years, yet each one bore the same warped features. Long skulls, bent postures, eyes devoid of light, yet eerily identical. One officer collapsed against the wall and vomited. Another swore he glimpsed a girl with 6 fingers curled against a crate. No one cried, no one begged. There was only silence, as if these women had never been taught to use words with strangers. They were quickly rushed to a temporary clinic while investigators sealed the barn. What they found inside was worse than any nightmare. Straw bedding drenched in filth, a rusted stove that still held blackened remnants of some unidentifiable meal, buckets used as toilets, barrels collecting rainwater. The walls were reinforced, locks secured from outside only. It was clear the barn was never meant to hold animals or harvests. It had been built from the beginning as a prison. The land belonged to Jeremiah Blackwood, an elderly man who had not been seen in town for more than a decade. By nightfall, state officers and federal agents had taken over. Reporters swarmed the road, yet little was revealed. Behind those barricades, an unimaginable history began to unfold, not of sudden cruelty, but of time stretched across generations. Inside the adjacent farmhouse, investigators uncovered journals, faded photographs, and ledgers filled with names and physical traits. Pages described births, deaths, and notations about genetic features, repeated through line after line. It was not only captivity. It was a controlled cycle of reproduction, a methodical scheme that transformed family into experiment. The deeper they dug, the more one name appeared: Jeremiah Blackwood. To understand how this man had orchestrated such horror, investigators had to reach back almost a century. In 1931, during the crushing years of the Great Depression, a man named Elijah Blackwood purchased 200 acres of remote forest for an unusually small price. Local gossip claimed the land was cursed. The previous owner had murdered his own family before taking his life. But for Elijah, ruined by economic collapse, the cheap land was a chance to disappear and rebuild in silence. He arrived with his wife and 5 children and melted into the woods like smoke. At first, there was contact with the town. The children enrolled in school, but within a year were withdrawn under the excuse of home education. Teachers recorded unease in old notes, describing the children as polite but strangely detached. By 1933, the family vanished from public life. They came to town only a few times a year, buying kerosene, ammunition, flour, and seeds in bulk. A shopkeeper scribbled in his diary, "The children never leave the car, the wife looks afraid, the old man never smiles." Soon neighbors stopped asking questions. In small communities, silence can be heavier than confrontation, and Elijah understood how to cloak himself with that silence. In 1943, recruiters knocked on rural doors searching for young men to fight in the war. 2 officers reached the Blackwood farm. Elijah met them at the gate with a shotgun and declared no Blackwood would ever die for a government that only remembers us when it needs bodies. The officers retreated and never returned. Whether from oversight or fear, the Blackwoods were left alone. That moment marked the beginning of complete withdrawal, not only from society, but from reality itself. Outsiders became the enemy, the government a disease, and within their compound, a twisted vision of family preservation took root. Elijah's son Harold inherited both land and philosophy. In the 1950s, he married his second cousin, Rebecca, a quiet woman from Idaho who vanished from public life after joining him. Neighbors glimpsed her only rarely, always veiled and silent. Letters from her family stopped arriving. Between 1953 and 1962, she gave birth to 6 children at home without medical aid. Only 3 survived: Jeremiah, Mary, and Joseph. Harold recorded the deaths of the others as natural defects. In his notebook from 1962, he wrote chilling words: "Rebecca is too weak for more children, but we do not need outsiders. Our blood is strong without mixing." That line was the spark. The barn had not yet been built, but the seed of obsession had already taken root. When Harold died in a farm accident in 1978, Jeremiah assumed control. He was 22 years old, and unlike his father, he would not merely flirt with isolation, he would embrace it fully. In 1983, town records show the last purchase ever made by a Blackwood: seeds, water purification systems, structural supplies, tools. He was not preparing for one season. He was preparing for generations. Jeremiah devoured outdated textbooks and breeding manuals. He scribbled charts, diagrams, and predictions. He believed himself a scientist guided by divine purpose. He saw outsiders as tainted by disease and decadence. He dreamed of shaping a lineage untouched by contamination. Investigators later found his journals sealed beneath floorboards, bound in leather, organized by year. His writing was neat, obsessive, filled with words like selection, control, and purity. He measured not just survival, but traits. High cheekbones noted as positive, eye color recorded with care, physical variants marked as defects to be corrected in the next cycle. His ideology was not chaos. It was method dressed as science. His library contained texts on eugenics, livestock manuals, and rewritten religious scripture. In one altered Bible, he inserted his own verses about chosen bloodlines. One passage declared the seed of Adam must remain unspoiled. To him it was not heresy, but holy law fused with biology. By the mid-1980s, his system had hardened. Girls were moved into the barn as soon as they reached adolescence. Pregnancies were tracked like farm yields. Failures marked with cold words. Successful births noted with pride. Children who died were dismissed as nature's correction. Girls who showed traits he disliked were reduced in importance. Some were paired with brothers or uncles to reinforce what he called the core line. His fixation on heterochromia, 2 different colored eyes, became an obsession. 4 of the women rescued in 1997 had this condition. In reality, it was linked to genetic disorders. To Jeremiah, it was a symbol of achievement. What emerged was not a household, but a factory, a generational machine powered by ideology and cruelty. Each birth carried not just twisted DNA, but the weight of his delusion. In his mind, he was not a captor. He was a creator. He wrote that he was preserving humanity against collapse, molding blood into perfection. Investigators later described his writings not as madness scribbled in the dark, but as methodical, premeditated, and ideology carved into flesh. From the outside, the barn looked like any other aging structure. Faded paint, sagging roof, weeds climbing its frame. But inside, it was a world frozen in terror. No plumbing, no electricity, no clocks. Time was measured only by slivers of daylight through the roof. The eldest daughter, Sarah, scratched marks into her bunk post, one for every day since she had been locked away at 15. Life inside followed strict routine. They woke with sunrise, cooked on the old stove with potatoes or carrots delivered at night, cleaned, tended a small garden patch, stitched clothing from rough cloth. They had no music, no books beyond a heavily altered Bible and a manual on sewing. Yet they built whispered codes, rituals, fragments of imagined stories. Their world ended at the barn door. The garden was their only taste of freedom, a patch of soil where they grew vegetables and flowers under supervision, tulips, daffodils, roses. It was the only color in their gray lives. One investigator later said everything was shadow, except that garden. It was their secret act of defiance, planting beauty where they were denied hope. Communication with the outside was not only forbidden, it was unimaginable. The women did not know who the president was. They did not know how electricity functioned. They had never seen an airplane. One girl named April believed flying machines were mythical birds. Their understanding of life was built on fragments of whispers and coded stories passed between sisters. The second eldest, named Emma, hid drawings beneath her bedding, sketches of cities with castles and wagons, pictures born only in imagination. Their lives looked medieval to outsiders, but to them it was ordinary, a reality shaped by one man who repeated again and again that the world was poisoned. Even within their captivity, they policed themselves. Fear was not only aimed at Jeremiah and Joseph, but carved into their very behavior. When asked why they never ran, Lily answered simply, "Where would we go?" Another said she believed the outside world was consumed by plague. Jeremiah had repeated the lie so many times it became gospel. Escape was not impossible. It was unthinkable. When the women were taken to Oregon University Medical Center, doctors braced for trauma, but were not prepared for the scale of genetic ruin. It was visible in their bodies, but worse in the scans. Most had elongated skulls, hollow eyes, and asymmetry. 5 had extra fingers or toes, some fused, some fully formed. 4 had heterochromia. Internal scans showed brittle bones, defective hearts, fragile immune systems. 19-year-old Rose was found to suffer from dwarfism, skull malformation, and immune deficiency. Her survival without medical treatment was described as miraculous, but truly it was tragic. Geneticists concluded their DNA had folded in on itself. Generations of inbreeding created loops of identical code, activating hidden diseases. April was diagnosed with phenylketonuria, a disorder that untreated leads to brain damage. She had never been diagnosed and never treated. Psychologists discovered that 5 of the women had intellectual disabilities, but it was impossible to separate genetics from deprivation. Sarah stood apart. She had taught herself to read from the edited Bible and a farm manual. She tracked time by beams of sunlight and soothed her sisters when they panicked. One doctor said she displayed adaptability no one expected. Yet even she admitted, "We did not know we were supposed to want more." A scientific community labeled the case a living archive of genetic collapse. Journals published studies under titles such as extreme endogamy and trait clustering. Every test and scan added knowledge, but also unease. These women were not research subjects. They were survivors. Their bodies carried evidence of ideology masquerading as science. What Jeremiah believed was refinement was degradation, a descent into biological ruin. The realization was haunting. None of it was accident. It was deliberate, etched into every scar, every bone, every silence. When the women began to recover, something unexpected emerged. They spoke slowly, carefully, building words like fragile structures. For years, their voices had been whispers and codes, but now they were heard. Sarah described being moved to the barn at 15 by a man she was taught to see as both father and prophet. He said our blood was stronger than any other. Her voice was steady, her words chilling in their calmness. Emma revealed her inner world through sketches of places she had never seen. Lily used phrases taught by Jeremiah: rotation, strengthening, union. They had no words for violation or abuse. Their language was shaped by the barn, stripped of self, bound to function. Linguists studied their fractured dialect, a mix of English and invented terms. The sun was called the Watcher. Rain was called whispering. Seasons were renamed by sensations, not months. They rarely used the word I. Their speech was collective. Years of existence as units, not individuals. Therapy introduced new vocabulary, and slowly they understood. Lily whispered, "I thought families lived like this. I thought the outside was gone." Through this process, they were reshaping identity. Sarah consumed books, finished children's tales in hours, moved to novels in weeks. She kept a journal, writing first about the barn, then about the world beyond. "Everything is noise here," she wrote, "but I think I like it." She challenged the lies Jeremiah taught. The world was not poisoned. Their blood was not chosen. It was scarred by cruelty. Emma poured her imagination into art, later shown in galleries as visions from nowhere. Lily, who once barely spoke, began to sing during therapy. Lullabies no one recognized, songs born in captivity. Healing was not simple. Panic flared at ordinary sounds. A microwave beep, a train rumble, a streetlight flicker. Some collapsed at the sight of mirrors, seeing their own faces for the first time. But they kept talking, rewriting their story. No longer shadows, no longer nameless subjects. They were survivors finding authorship. The trial of Jeremiah and Joseph Blackwood became a spectacle. Prosecutors presented decades of journals, photographs, testimonies. The crimes were not spontaneous, but calculated, carried out over generations. Jeremiah sat in court, wearing a wrinkled suit, showing no emotion. When asked if he understood the charges, he replied, "I understand you are trying to destroy what I built." His lawyer attempted insanity, but evaluations declared him fully competent, dangerously certain of his beliefs. Joseph broke earlier. He wept. In court, covered his face as testimonies were read. In a letter he confessed, "I believed the barn was the only place untouched. I was wrong." His words contrasted Jeremiah's defiance. Where one saw vision, the other saw ruin. The most powerful moment came when Sarah stood to testify. She addressed the man she once called father. "You told us we were chosen, but what you meant was that we were yours. You did not raise a family. You built a cage and named it a kingdom. I hope the world remembers your name not as sacred, but as warning." The jury returned swiftly. Jeremiah was found guilty of kidnapping, incest, abuse, imprisonment. He received 6 life sentences without parole. The judge declared this was not abuse alone. It was the dismantling of human dignity over generations. Jeremiah did not flinch. He said, "You destroyed a sanctuary, not a prison. One day you will regret it." Joseph received 45 years. His remorse reducing his sentence, but not erasing guilt. The case shocked the nation. Reporters struggled to frame it. Cult story, crime story, scientific case study. In truth, it was all of these, a mirror reflecting what isolation and ideology can become. For the survivors, it was more than a verdict. It was the end of silence. They were moved to a rehabilitation center in Portland. For the first time, they slept in clean beds, bathed in warm water, saw televisions, lights, elevators. At first, every sound startled them. A beeping microwave caused panic. A mirror triggered sobbing. Doctors called them time travelers, not from another place, but from another century. A program was created blending therapy, education, medical treatment, and daily training. They learned to use money, public transport, simple appliances. Outings were supervised, street crossings taught step by step. Yet beneath the shock, resilience grew. Sarah pursued her education, wrote a memoir titled Born in Darkness. Emma became an artist. Her drawings sold to galleries. Lily sang during sessions, her voice fragile but alive. Rose and April required constant care, but they too began to smile at simple joys. Healing was uneven, but it was progress. Sarah's memoir became a bestseller. A documentary followed, telling their story with their voices and art. Prophets went into a trust for their future. Sarah wrote, "We were never given choices before. Now every choice is ours. That is freedom." By 2015, the barn was demolished. In its place stood a small garden, with tulips blooming each spring, marked by a plaque reading in honor of the human spirit's survival against cruelty. May no silence ever grow this loud again. Some of the women moved into supervised apartments. 2 married, 1 became a teacher. Sarah became an advocate, speaking at national conferences, telling crowds not all cages have bars. Some are built with belief. She gave a famous talk titled, "What the Barn Taught Me About Freedom." Her message was not rage but clarity. They tried to erase our capacity to dream, but here we are dreaming anyway. The horror at the Blackwood farm rippled outward. Lawmakers passed the Sarah Law in 2003, mandating wellness checks for homeschooled children in remote areas and training officials to detect hidden imprisonment. Scientific institutions studied the anonymized genetic data with consent. From the women, publishing papers on rare disorders and the effects of closed populations. Yet the survivors were not reduced to subjects. They were recognized as individuals first. Some changed their names, some moved to new cities, but every year they reunited on the rescue anniversary. They lit candles, read poetry, walked barefoot in gardens, rituals of remembrance, not grief. Their bond endured beyond blood. They were sisters not only by genetics, but by survival. The barn was gone, the locks rusted away, the silence broken. Their legacy was not the pain inflicted, but the world reshaped by their survival. For every person who hears their story and asks what may hide behind another quiet home, their voices speak again, soft but strong. We are here, we survived, and the world knows our names.